Today, we arrive at one of the most sobering and heartbreaking chapters in all of Scripture, Matthew 27. Here we see the betrayal, trial, suffering, and crucifixion of Jesus Christ. This chapter confronts us with the brutality of human sin, the injustice of corrupt systems, and the unimaginable depth of Christ's love as he endures it all for our salvation. Good morning, and welcome back to The Late Disciple. I'm David, and today we're discussing the crucifixion of Jesus. And it's the most difficult and heartbreaking thing I've ever researched and documented. I'll be honest, I've delayed in making this recording, and while there's no disturbing visual depictions, some of this discussion does get graphic, and for me, disturbing. Let's walk through this together. At daybreak, the religious leaders finalized their decision from the night before. Their secret, unlawful trial had already condemned Jesus, but now they meet during the day to give it the appearance of legality. So they handed him over to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, to be tried by the Romans. Remember, with very little exception, the Romans reserved the right to try and convict citizens and execute them. Pilate normally resided in Caesarea by the Mediterranean, but during the Passover, he stayed in Jerusalem to oversee the crowds. And that's how Jesus came before him on this morning. Before the trial continues, Matthew pauses to tell us about Judas's fate. Overcome with remorse, Judas threw the 30 pieces of silver back at the priests. They're unable to put it into the temple treasury because they admit that it's blood money. So instead, they use it to purchase a potter's field, which later became known as the Field of Blood. Luke, in Acts, records the same field as being tied directly to Judas's own gruesome death. After hanging himself, his body falls and bursts open on the rocks below. Both its purchase with blood money and the graphic end of Judas taken together explain how the field came to be known by its infamous name. Back to the trial. Pilate quickly realizes that the charges against Jesus were fueled by envy and political maneuvering. He gave Jesus every opportunity to defend himself, yet Jesus remained silent. Pilate even tried to offer another way out using the public crowd. It was custom at Passover to release a prisoner of their choosing. He put forward Jesus and Barabbas, another criminal. It should be noticed here that Barabbas was known to have participated in a rebellion, presumably against the Romans, so that in itself probably served to support both Pilate's desire to crucify him instead of Jesus, as well as the crowd's desire not to. To Pilate's astonishment, the crowd, stirred into a frenzy by the priests, of course, chose Barabbas. Matthew includes an interesting detail here. Pilate's wife had a troubling dream about Jesus and urged her husband not to harm him. Dreams, you'll remember, are a recurring theme throughout Matthew's Gospel, and this is unique among the 4 Gospel authors. From Joseph and the Magi to now this moment, Jesus recounts 6 moments in which God provides insights or instructions to others through dreams. But despite his own desire and his wife's dreams, Pilate ultimately caves in to the pressure of the crowd. He washed his hands in a public display, declaring himself innocent of Jesus' blood, and the people cried out, "His blood be on us and our children." Jesus was then handed over for scourging, more commonly known as flogging. This was no simple beating. It was a calculated act of torture. The whip, called a flagrum, had several strips of leather in which were embedded pieces of bone and metal. The victim was tied to a post with their hands over their head, the skin of their back stretched tight, and then whipped. The Roman soldiers who performed this were expert in this inhumane technique and could literally rend the flesh from the back, lacerating muscle and even exposing bone and the kidneys or other organs. The punishment was so brutal that many did not survive it to go on to the cross. But Jesus did, and afterward the soldiers mocked him further, placing a scarlet cloak around him, pressing a crown of thorns on his head, beating him with a reed and spitting in his face. And by reed, think of being beat about the head and the body with a broomstick handle, not some flimsy stick. From there, he was led to Golgotha. The soldiers here offered him a mixture of wine and gall, but he refused it. This was a mixture that was commonly used as a pain-killing narcotic, and it was traditionally administered to those who were crucified. It was a significant act of courage and obedience for Jesus to refuse this, as he instead chose to face the full agony of what was to come. Roman crucifixion was the most excruciating form of execution ever devised. It was passed down to the Romans by the Persians, Phoenicians, and Carthaginians, though the Romans had perfected it. Victims were taken to the site of the crucifixion and thrown to the ground on top of the ribbons of exposed flesh all along their backside. Then their arms were stretched out and their wrists were nailed to the crossbeam, which is not yet attached to the vertical portion of the cross, nailed with iron spikes, their length being between 5 or 7 or 12 to 14 inches, depending upon the reference used. The nails weren't driven through the hands because the hands couldn't support the body weight. Instead, they had to be driven between bone, at the point where the hand meets the wrist. Specifically, they were driven through the median nerve, causing unimaginable pain to radiate up the arms into the upper torso. This created a condition called causalgia, and the slightest movement, even a breeze, would result in waves of throbbing, shriek-inducing pain. Then, with all their flesh exposed, they pulled the victim up along the splintered vertical beam, attached the pieces, and finally nailed their feet to the cross. This was also horrific, as they pierced either the instep or Achilles of both feet to the cross, sometimes using a single nail for both feet. Often the legs were also broken, though this was not the case for Jesus. As he was already so badly beaten, it was feared that this would too greatly hasten his death. Victims would often hang on the cross for days before dying of exhaustion, dehydration, traumatic fever, or in most cases, suffocation. When the legs would no longer support the weight of the body, the diaphragm was constricted in a way that made breathing impossible. Some victims lingered long enough to be eaten alive by birds of prey or wild beasts. The word excruciate is literally derived from this practice. And yet, for Jesus, even this physical torment was not the worst part. Aside from the psychological and emotional trauma of being betrayed, misunderstood, humiliated, rejected, and now tortured, the worst pain for him was the abandonment he experienced, the infinite pain of the separation from the infinite love of the Trinity, a pain we can never begin to understand. Even as he hung from the cross, he was mocked by both passerby and religious elites, the same people he came to save. And again he is challenged to prove that he is the Son of God by coming down from the cross. Ironically, he could have come down from the cross, and the fact that he chose not to is the real proof of his deity. It wasn't that he could not, but that he would not. Lastly, even the 2 robbers at either side of him mocked him as well. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness fell over the land. And then Jesus loudly cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This is the moment he experiences the abandonment and despair resulting from the outpouring of divine wrath upon him as a sin bearer. Notice that Jesus doesn't address God as my Father, because now He is separated from him, and the relationship is Messiah and God. Now he is the second Adam, and no longer sinless, but only for now. At last, Jesus gives up his spirit voluntarily. And at that very moment, there was an earthquake, and the temple veil was torn from top to bottom. The veil was a massive, heavy curtain that hung in the temple, separating the holy place from the most holy place, the Holy of Holies. It was made of very fine linen. It was blue, purple, scarlet, and very thick and heavy, with cherubim woven into it. It was a sacred barrier that symbolized God's separation from sinful humanity. Only the high priest was allowed to pass through the veil, and only him once a year. Now, the veil that had separated humanity from the presence of God was removed, and through Christ, the way was opened. Matthew adds details no other gospel records. After the earthquake, tombs broke open, and many holy ones were seen alive in Jerusalem. It was a sign that his death had conquered the grave. But let's back up a moment. Although Matthew includes this account here, it's important to note that while the tombs were broken open at this time, the spirits of the saints did not appear until after Jesus' resurrection, which Matthew does specify, though so briefly you could miss that important distinction. Even the hardened Roman centurion and his soldiers, standing at Jesus' cross, only hours before had mocked him, now confess, truly, this was the Son of God. That evening, Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy member of the Sanhedrin who had quietly followed Jesus, stepped forward in courage. He, along with Nicodemus, took Jesus' body, wrapped it, and laid him in a new tomb. A great stone sealed the entrance. Meanwhile, the religious leaders, fearing his prophecy of rising again, went to Pilate and requested guards so that Jesus' body wouldn't be stolen in an effort to prevent the potential of a fraudulent claim of resurrection. They must have been in genuine fear, too, because they violated religious observances by conducting this visit on a Sabbath. Matthew 27 is almost unbearable in its brutality. And yet, it is the very heart of the gospel. Jesus endured betrayal, humiliation, torture, abandonment, and death. Not because he had to, but because he chose to, because he chose us. When Joseph of Arimathea stepped out of hiding to identify with Jesus in his death, it was a bold act of faith. The question that remains for us today is this: when the world mocks or rejects him, will we too step forward and identify with Christ, even if it cost us everything? Thank you for studying this difficult chapter with me today. If this video spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and maybe share this video with someone who might not know the enormity of the price Christ paid for us. Next time, we'll wrap up the book of Matthew with a brief but glorifying chapter of Jesus' resurrection. Until then, stay faithful, stay watchful, and keep walking with Christ. And remember, we are all disciples. It is never too late.